Hi everyone, Bren here. Welcome to this week's garden update. Bit of change of scenery. I'm actually inside today because it's so hot in the garden and I thought, you know what? Why not just do a bit of recording in here with the aircon? In this week's video, I'm going to go through 5 more cold hardy vegetables that you can sow now in February here in New South Wales, Australia. I'm also going to show you some eco-friendly, budget-friendly seed starting equipment. They're like everyday household items. Then we're going to go through a few seed sowing tips, and at the very end we'll take a look at the bouquets that I put together for sale this week. So please just sit back, relax for a few minutes and let's get into it now. Last week I went through 5 cold hardy vegetables that can be sown in late February here in New South Wales, Australia, and this week I'm going to go through 5 more. You know what's really exciting? This is only an absolutely tiny selection of what you can sow now. There are so many more edibles that you can get growing in February. What I will do is I will list them down in the description below so you can go and check them out. And remember, when you are growing edibles in your garden, space is precious. Even when you have a big garden, you try and grow what you know you will eat. There's no point in growing a certain crop when you know you're just not going to enjoy it in the kitchen. Let's start off with something a bit spicy. Rocket, also known as arugula, which can be a bit confusing for new gardeners when they're reading, information about this leafy green. The names are different around the world, aren't they? I think my US friends call this arugula, but here in Australia we call it rocket. I'm not sure what we call it in Ireland. I don't even remember eating it when I was a kid. Anyway, if anyone knows, let me know in the comment what you call it in your country. If you've never tasted rocket before, you might be wondering why I mentioned spicy a minute ago. Well, that's because rocket leaves have quite a peppery flavour. One very simple but delicious way you can eat rocket is by making a salad that I was first introduced to maybe 10-15 years ago. Very basic, very few ingredients. You put a bunch of rocket leaves, some shaved parmesan, and slices of pear with a very basic balsamic dressing. Oh my goodness, you have got to try it. Anyway, I've got the next one, which is another leafy green, great one for beginner gardeners, lettuce. And in this pack you can see it's actually got a mix of different varieties, which I tend to like because I do enjoy the aesthetic in the garden, and having a bit of a mix of colors here just makes it pop a bit more in the patch. I usually wouldn't include this, but I just want to let you know that my brain is not functioning properly at the moment. It's probably because last week or this week, it was Valentine's Day. It was quite busy and I feel a bit like I can't focus on anything. And when I was looking at the lettuce, I just had this thought in the back of my mind that, oh my goodness, did I already talk about lettuce last week? So I just had to go on my phone and go back to last week's video, and I didn't, thank goodness. So anyway, we'll keep on going. If you are a small space gardener, like say for example you've got a balcony off your apartment, what you can do is you can grow lettuce in a container. It grows really well that way, as does the rocket that I had just mentioned. In a few of my past videos, I've already mentioned that there's a way to grow lettuce fast, and that is densely sowing the seeds in a container, direct sow them, or you can start them off in punnets and put the seedlings quite close, a lot closer than what it would say here on the instructions at the back of the pack. That way you will have a lot of smaller plants that you'll be able to harvest the smaller leaves from, rather than growing 2 or 3 plants, allowing them to develop to maturity before you start harvesting from them. Next up is cauliflower, which is related to broccoli, a cold hardy vegetable that I had in last week's list. I've noticed over the last few years that cauliflower has become extremely popular again, and people have been using this vegetable very creatively in the kitchen. One that comes to mind is cauliflower rice. This is where you grate the head and the small pieces resemble rice, and it can be used as a substitute for that carb in many dishes. And I just remembered a few weeks back I shared my teriyaki cauliflower bites recipe with you using one of these delicious vegetables. We've now got 2 left on the list. Next up is cabbage. This one reminds me a lot of my childhood in Ireland, because a lot of the gardens that we used to visit would have cabbages growing in there, and I understand why. It grows really well in the Irish climate, but you'd need to be aware with this vegetable that it can be quite slow growing and it does take up a lot of space. Having said that though, great news for small space gardeners. I have noticed that there's a lot of new varieties that actually just grow more compact, so you will be able to put them into a container on a balcony. I haven't tried it myself. I might try and see if I can source a few of those seeds and do a little bit of experimenting here, create a little, small space garden just to see how they grow. Last but certainly not least, we have leeks, which is a member of the allium family. It's packed full of nutrients such as iron, vitamin A and vitamin C. I'm thinking with these, potato and leek soup, chicken and leek pie, those really hearty dishes that keep you going through the cold winter days. And like what I mentioned with the rocket earlier on, leeks have beautiful flowers. They're like large ball shapes of these clusters of flowers, and they are a bee magnet. Plus you can actually use some of them in flower arrangements, which I did this year and I will continue to do in future years. They add a really nice interest and much cheaper than buying those ornamental liliums that are quite expensive to purchase. And I know what some of you are thinking, why would I add a stinky onion scented flower to an arrangement that I'm going to sell on? Well, you know what? The blooms, the leek blooms, don't actually smell like onions. They smell quite sweet. And I guess that would make sense because they want the bees to be attracted to them so that pollination occurs. Right, so that's the 5 cold hardy vegetables for today. I'll list, as I said, many more down in the description below. And also, just to give you a bit of a heads up, in the next few videos I will be going through some edible flowers that you can sow now, plus some cut flowers which, if you sow now, overwinter those plants, you will get an early crop of blooms that you'll be able to put together in arrangements, whether it's just for your kitchen or you're thinking of maybe starting a small business to sell them. You will have them in early spring. I'm now going to go outside and show you some of my seed sowing equipment that I use. Some eco-friendly, very cheap bits and pieces, everyday items in your home that you can use to get growing. You can use toilet roll holders like this. They make really great little miniature pots. If you leave them intact, nice and long, you can use these to sow your pea seeds, or if you like, you can cut them up into shorter pieces like this one. If you make a few cuts along the bottom like I have done here and fold them in, just try to get a grip like this. It gives it a little base, making sure you leave a little hole in the center for drainage, and that's like a really cheap, easy miniature pot. You can save up old takeaway containers and place all the toilet roll holders in here, then just fill it up with soil. Don't be too concerned if soil falls out in between the gaps. It's all right, not a big deal. You can always use that up later when you're planting them. Add in a bit of the seed raising mix too. A simple milk jug is really so useful in the garden. You can cut it up into strips and use it as labels for your seeds. You can pierce holes in the top here and use it as a mini watering can. You can cut it up and keep the handle and use it as a scooper when you're scooping up potting mix or seed raising mix. It's just really handy, and it's very versatile too. The humble little milk carton. If you save up your berry containers, you can use these as a miniature greenhouse. They've already got little holes in the bottom for drainage. Perfect to get your seeds started. Very useful to use when you are sowing in late winter. You don't really need them now this time of year, because you do risk, if you keep this shut, you risk your seedlings getting overheated and dying back. But you know, if you're gardening on a budget, I would definitely advise you to start saving these now, or even if you don't eat many of them, ask your friends and family if they can save them for you. If you go to a barbecue, see if you can wash and save up these barbecue trays, because they make a wonderful little reservoir to hold water when you're trying to get your seeds to germinate. There are lots of different options out there when it comes to the soil that you use to get your seeds to germinate. If you are new to gardening, and you know what, I still do it now, I don't get complicated making my own recipe up. I just use a simple seed raising mix. I love this because you're guaranteed that it will be sterile, particularly good if you are a new gardener. If you use something like making your own compost, you do risk having other seeds in that mix that will germinate, and you may not be able to tell the difference between what you actually want to grow and which one is a weed. I grabbed this one from my local hardware store, I believe. It's a Yates. There are a lot of good companies out there that sell decent seed raising mix, and you know what, if you're on a budget, you know, don't do what I just did, buy a smaller pack that's more expensive per gram, I guess you'd say. Buy the larger bags and you get better value for money. I aim to get this wet but not completely saturated. It's important to wear gloves, especially if you're using potting mix, because in potting mix there can be some bad bacteria which can make you quite sick. So wear your gloves, wear a mask, and protect yourself from especially Legionnaire's disease. That's something that can be picked up from doing this, and it's always important to be safe in your garden. I've just cut the toilet roll holders to the size I like, and I'm going to fill these up with soil like this. I did do it very quickly, so there is a bit of seed raising mix in between the rolls. You can always just be a bit more careful. You can scoop them up with a little spoon if you like, or you can just leave them be. I'm going to sow some of these cauliflower seeds. Just be careful where you rip the packet to open it. I do it here at the bottom because there's no information there that I really need. If I was to rip it here on the top, I would destroy the picture of the seedling. That comes in really handy if you're new to gardening, and then lots of other great information here too. This is what cauliflower seeds look like. Now if you want to grow say 2 or 3 plants in your garden, I would sow double that, triple that in seeds. You might think that could be wasteful, but I don't see it that way, because oftentimes you don't get great germination. Slugs and snails can eat your seedlings and other garden pests, so always better to oversow in my opinion, and then you can always just like thin them out afterwards and leave the strongest seedling. I'm now going to cover them up. As a general rule of thumb, when it comes to sowing seeds, you want to sow them at a depth which is about 2 or 3 times the width of the seed. And then with your milk carton, I've only done one because I'm running out of time, but you can cut out these strips and they are perfect to use as labels. Here's the top tip. I've made this mistake, but I have learned from it. Now, when you are sowing seeds, especially if you're doing lots of different varieties, it's really important to label as you go, because even though with best intentions you think you're going to remember what you sowed, you won't. You know, you come back an hour later, you've had a few distractions, your brain becomes a bit foggy, and you just don't know what's in each tray, each punnet, and it just gets very confusing. So yeah, label, put the name of the plant. You can also put the date that you sowed it to. I like to use a permanent marker to write down the info. It just doesn't come off as easily as it would if you use a pencil or some other type of marker. Ooh, it's out of focus, there we go. When it comes to watering, you have a couple of options. I usually bottom water, but this one's a little bit messy to be doing that. So basically what I do is I put some water at the bottom, and the soil or the potting mix absorbs it up to the seed and the seedling as needed. In this case, I won't be doing it, so I like to use a mister to start off with. Just be careful if you're sowing really tiny seeds. Like these cauliflower seeds aren't too small, but if you're surface sowing, little tiny seeds, and you come in with a watering can. You could dislodge them and then they just move all about, so bottom watering is better for them. But today with this one I'm going to be top watering. I'm now going to show you some of the flower arrangements that I sold this week. I managed to record some of the bouquets that I put together this week, especially for Valentine's Day. These were the batch I sent off to Tarmore Garden Centre. I would have loved if they were all like, you know, red and purple themed, but I just used what I had in the garden. One thing I did, a little added touch, was I put a piece of ribbon at the bottom just to make it a bit different. Otherwise, I kept my wrapping of the flowers the exact same. These are a couple of table arrangements. Now, I did want to say that I actually lacked confidence in knowing how many flowers I would have for this week in particular. So I was very fortunate to be able to purchase some flowers from a local grower. She actually lives in the same town as me. Her name is Nicole, and here is her Instagram page. Well worth checking out. So I bought $100 worth of flowers from her, which I incorporated into some of the bouquets. But most of what you see here was grown in my garden. Here in the kitchen beside me on the floor is a bucket of flowers that didn't quite make it into any of those bouquets. One of the blooms is this dahlia called Fire and Ice, a lovely ball dahlia. You can see there it has lovely red petals with white tips, and the reason why, you can probably figure out why this one didn't make it into a arrangement, is because something ate all the tips of the leaves or the petals. And while I don't mind putting, or I'm able to put, a few flowers that have slight damage because I am an organic gardener and that's to be expected, some of the blooms are just too badly damaged to add in. So this one is going to be enjoyed on my kitchen table. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. It looks like there's going to be a heat wave in many parts of Australia over the next couple of days. I think it's 34 degrees tomorrow here in the Sydney area, so probably won't be spending much time out in the garden, maybe early morning, making sure everything gets a good drink. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. See you again soon.